I'm in Bradford-on-Avon, which is an old town full of listed buildings, 17th and 18th century largely, and the aim of this video is to demonstrate how overzealous maintenance and repair can sometimes do more damage than good. I'm standing at some distance from the property I'm looking at to avoid the noise from the traffic. However, let me try and zoom in a little. There we go, here's our property. It is, well, it's a listed building, slightly bizarrely, and it was built early 19th century. So it should be, being in Bradford, built of limestone with solid walls, but you can see from here, probably, that it is now faced in cement render. I've obviously chosen the wrong time of day to come here, but our property comprises the door and the windows to each side. At this side of the property we have a pair of air bricks at the bottom of the wall, whereas over there are no air bricks. And if we have a close look at the render, there are some fairly significant gaps between the main wall and the whatever it is that's kicking out there. Several layers of render, all broken up, so there'll be a lot of rain penetration getting in there. Let's go and have a look inside. Right, I've stepped through the front door, and what we have is a hall with a concrete floor. At each side of the concrete floor we have suspended timber floors. This is the room on the left hand side, and as we've already seen, there's no subfloor ventilation, and the front elevation has been rendered all the way down to ground level, and there's some cracking in the render. So I think there's a number of problems. A suspended timber floor needs ventilation. There's no ventilation to the front. We've got a concrete floor to the hall, so there's no ventilation to the side. And round the back, this is another concrete floor in the kitchen. And there's a party wall the other side, so it's a completely unventilated floor. The next issue, I think, is probably that it's got some sort of, or has had a sort of linoleum nailed across the top, or fitted across the top. So any moisture that does accumulate inside the floor has no mechanism for evaporating out through the floorboards. So the result of this accumulation of moisture under the floor with pretty much nowhere to go is that the perfect environment for a dry rot outbreak has developed. And I think it's generally understood that what dry rot really likes is, let me just make sure I walk along the floor joists so I don't go through the floor, to about here. Yes, dry rot. It likes an unventilated environment, it likes a light-free environment, and it likes moisture. So all three are provided very nicely in this scenario. And what does dry rot do? It eats wood. I mean, you can probably find a rather more eloquent definition of what dry rot does, but it degrades wood and turns it into this rather cuboidally fractured, friable stuff, which is something like balsa wood, which has no strength to it whatsoever, as a result of which it is possible to stand on it and put your foot right through it, which is what's happened here. So let's have a close look. I mean, I know that the owners of this house are a little bit upset by people actively smashing it up, so I should be a little bit careful. So let's have a look at a piece of affected timber. There it is. I mean, there's not much to it anymore. Let's see what sort of strength it's got to it now. Powdery. And crumbly. And we can just about see there's a little bit of a sprawling mat of white, what are those called? Hyphae, I think, which is how the fungus spreads from one place to another. Here I think we can see that the floor joist beneath has disintegrated in an equal manner, so there's no strength in the floorboards or in the floor joists. And just there we've got a skirting board which is disintegrated in a similar manner. Just having another look at the sort of damage that's being done to floorboards by the decay. And even the linoleum seems to have suffered from the effect of being damp for a prolonged period of time. This is the room on the other side of the house which did have two air vents to it. Air bricks at the front of the house, so the floor did have some ventilation, but once again there is a concrete floor behind it, so no through flow of air. A concrete floor to this side. Remains of hyphae spreading out from the dry rot fungus. There's a nice example there, and the skirting board at the back there has gone all crinkly. An interesting thing about crinkly skirting boards, if you ever see that, then you know that the reverse side of the skirting board, which is attached to the wall, will have been rotting for some time, and it's only after a period of time that the painted surface starts to go crinkly. So if you do find a house with slightly crinkly painted skirting boards, then you can rely on the fact that the skirting board is already quite rotten, and if that's rotten, then so too probably is any floor beneath it. Here again we've got I never remember what they're called. Is it a mycelium or are they hyphae? Anyway, there's evidence of the dry rot fungus migrating across the floor, looking for some more timber to infest. And are these piles of brown dust a symptom of dry rot? I think they probably are. Are they spores, are they? So I shall probably carry those to back home to my house later on. And here we have piles of dust underneath the underlay on the top side of the carpets, which is probably another sign of decay, spores being produced by some sort of fungus. And quite possibly, if we were to lift these floorboards, which we're not going to do, there would probably somewhere be a nice big fungal growth to take pictures of, but perhaps that's something which we might be able to do at a later date, perhaps. There's the skirting board in the hall with fairly classic cuboidal fractures that you might associate with dry rot. And this is the understair cupboard, where all this dusty stuff hanging around in spiders' webs is evidence of woodworm infestation. So we can see lots of little holes in the woodwork. There's perhaps a better example over there. Can we see that? Holes in the woodwork with little trails of dust underneath the holes. That's the frass left behind when the adult beetles crawl out of the woodwork. So if you see that, that's a clear sign that the woodworm infestation is active. One thing that is relatively interesting, I suppose, is the floor has already been repaired. There's a stretch along the skirting board there, which is newer than the main floor, and they seem to have still missed the opportunity to sort the problem out, because the newer floor is now pretty damn rotten, with signs of fungal growth sprawling across the top of the floorboards. This was obviously growing between the floorboards and the linoleum, so they seem to have missed the point, whoever did that repair. And it is, well, I might be barking completely up the wrong tree here, but the older floorboards also appear to be perhaps middle, early 20th century as well. So possibly all this has happened before, and rather than ventilating the floor, they've just built another one straight on top of the old one. Well, I think to summarise what that little episode demonstrates is that a suspended timber ground floor needs to be ventilated, and that you can't ventilate a timber ground floor from the front only, so it needs to be ventilated from, well, front and back. So there's probably no point in reinstating a new timber floor. That one needs to be discarded, and then there's an opportunity to put in a modern concrete floor with insulation and a damp-proof membrane. It is a listed building, so somebody's going to have to persuade the listed buildings officer that it's a good idea. After that, there's still a problem with dampness generally, so I think the render needs to come off the bottom of the wall. And there's obviously the theory that render going down to the ground encourages moisture to migrate up the wall between the render and the main wall itself. But I think with this wall's made of solid stone, so a certain amount of moisture is going to be migrating through the stone wall anyway, so that argument's possibly irrelevant. But cement render's going to be trapping moisture inside the wall, so I think that somebody needs to be brave and knock it all off. If you're lucky, there won't be too much damage to the stone wall, and there'll be something reasonable there that can be refurbished with lime mortar. Then you've got a wall that moisture can just evaporate out of. It won't be trapped inside, it won't be building up. You just have a much drier house. And as a last resort, if it is a last resort, it can be re-rendered. I mean, if the stone face is really dreadfully knackered, then it can be re-rendered with lime mortar, which moisture will be able to evaporate out of. Obviously moisture's coming in through the back of the house, but that's another issue altogether, which isn't something I'm going to be discussing here.